All right, we'll call to order the April 13th, 2021 Planning and Zoning Commission meeting. First, the call to order. Charlie?
Misty Solbush,
Here.
Sarah Ritchie,
Here.
Joe Butler, Al Ferris,
Here.
Aaron Freeberg,
Here.
Becky Needles, Bob Ormsby,
Here.
Jeremy Preble, and Josh Ray.
Okay. Next is approval of the agenda. Does anyone have any questions?
Move approval.
Do we have a second?
I'll second. Bob Ormsby.
All in favor?
Aye.
Next is approval of the minutes from the last meeting on March 9th, 2021. Are there any comments? And if not, we move for an approval.
I'll approve the meeting minutes.
That was Sarah. Do we have a second?
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
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 All right. The next item is public comments. This would be for any comments outside of agenda items. Is there any comment? I don't believe so. There's no old business, but for new business, item A is review changes to Chapter 76 bicycles, adding in micro mobility regulations. And this is a joint item with the Parks and Recreation Commission. Charlie?
Yeah, so I'll hand it off to Mindy Moore with Snyder and Associates here in a little bit. I know she's going to kind of do a screen share on there. So for the people in the room, it'll be on the TV up there unless you have a laptop in front of you. So pretty much you might have to look up there. But a few months ago, actually, I should say it was a few months before Christmas, the city got approached by a electric scooter company about locating scooters within town. We worked with both Simpson College and the Chamber of Commerce to kind of feel them out, see what their opinion was. It was favorable. We then worked with the city council to get their opinion on it. Again, was favorable, but at that moment we realized to allow them in our city, we were likely going to have to be looking at some code changes. So the council directed staff to work through those code changes. And in that process, they did ask that the commission and the Parks and Rec Commission review those. So as I worked with Doug Byland on this, we thought it'd be more appropriate to have a joint meeting with the two commissions to kind of save some time on this. So there are members of the Parks and Rec Commission who are joining for this item this evening. From there, I'll hand it over to Mindy. Well, really quick, I guess what I'll add is, and Mindy might talk about this, but as we looked at this item, we thought it did fit kind of appropriately within those bike regulations. We also kind of identified some areas within our existing bike regulations that could likely use some updating, some modernization in that. So I think Mindy's going to go over quite a bit of that, but any questions at the end, we'll take them. And I think Mindy's going to kind of go through those changes, and if there's comments along the way, feel free to jump in. So Mindy, I'll hand it over to you.
Great. Thanks, Charlie. I'm going to go ahead and try to share my screen. And I guess if anyone has any questions as we go through, we can kind of discuss it as we go through. Feel free to interrupt me in case I'm not seeing, someone raise a hand or something like that. So I've been working on this code changes for Indianola. This is something that, I've been involved with biking and looking at bike codes for years. So I was pretty familiar with some of the issues. I'd done a little research on the scooters. I own my own electric scooter, so I'm a little bit familiar with that as well. So this sort of just seemed like a good fit for me to try to work on this too. as far as I prepared this memo with a little bit of background instead of just kind of handing off a strike through underlying format of code, so that we can kind of explain the thought process and the sort of research process behind it. So first of all, there is Iowa Code chapter that covers a few issues related to biking. There isn't any Iowa code that covers electric scooters. However, a couple of things were introduced into the legislature in the last couple of years. Nothing has been approved and passed. So I wanted to refer to that stuff that had been considered, just so we were aware of kind of the direction things might be going at the state level. But just keep in mind that something else could come up in the future, something else could be adopted. So it's something that we kind of, as local communities, need to keep an eye on what's happening at the state level as well. The Iowa Bike Coalition, the Des Moines Street Collective, the Des Moines Area MPO have all worked on model bike ordinances. They have not worked on model scooter ordinances. So I wanted to kind of make that clear too, that I used some of the model bike language, but had to modify that to accommodate scooters as well. Of course, Bird, when they approached the city, they also came with their own sort of version of an ordinance. I would say it, in essence, it basically said, treat us the same as bicycles, but don't allow them on sidewalks. It was pretty sort of brief and light, I would say, compared to what we're going to look at here tonight. A couple of things I noted in the memo here that I did not include, that I did see in other codes, one was hand signals. And I just thought, that's really tough to say that you have to use a hand signal when you're biking or on a scooter, because you need your hands for balance as well. And we can't tell by looking at someone whether they're balanced well enough to take a hand off the handlebars. I know there's times that I'm not balanced well enough, especially on the scooter, to take a hand off. So I thought that requirement would be pretty difficult to enforce. I still think it's good, proper etiquette to use hand signals. And we could talk about sort of the difference between what belongs in a code versus what belongs sort of in trail or biking etiquette. So not everything necessarily needs to be codified, but some things could be just encouraged as good, safe practice. Pedicabs was something that was in the Des Moines ordinance. And when you think about that, I think generally we're thinking about something that's operated as a business where someone's giving a ride to someone else, like in a chariot, or in like those great big multi-user sort of things where everyone's on there biking and maybe drinking and some other sort of thing, some other recreational activities are going on. This code does not address that. I would think that if and when someone approaches the city to try to do something like that, we'd have to sort of reevaluate that and the rules that would go along with that. It's sort of a whole different animal to talk about pedicabs. So let's get into the strike through underline format. So as Charlie mentioned, basically we took the bike regulations, added in the micromobility, and updated the biking rules along with that. So this is just the various sections of the code. We added a purpose and definitions to be consistent with other new sections of your city code. Of course, as you know, underline things are added and strike through are removed. And the other stuff in black text was already there. And we didn't, change those titles. I will say that this actions and against bicycles and micromobility devices, that's something that was in the state code that I added in. Responsible riding, I took several other sections and sort of lumped them into that category. It seemed like things like riding on sidewalks, carrying articles, speed, sort of some of those things just kind of all seem to fall under the same category of just being responsible when you're riding, before they were their own separate sections of the code. And then obviously parking, equipment, and the penalty, those sections were already there. So we added a purpose basically to set forth regulations. We added several definitions. So the bicycle itself, we have very similar to the state code's definition, with the addition of a more clarification on what a class 1 electric bicycle and a class 2 electric bicycle are. So basically the state code, and I do have that definition down here. Hopefully everyone can see my screen okay. Let me know if you can't, and I'll try to zoom in or something. But basically the state code says a bicycle includes an electric bicycle with a that goes less than 20 miles per hour and a motor of less than 750 watts, which is 1 horsepower. So we kept that same thing, but then we added on just these 2 different classes of bicycles. And one basically says that it only provides assistance. The electric motor only provides assistance when the user is pedaling. The other one says the motor provides assistance even if the user is not pedaling, but they're both limited to 20 miles per hour. And that's pretty consistent. The 20 miles per hour also, just so you know, when we design trails, for example, a lot of times we use a 20 mile per hour design speed. So sometimes it's a little bit less. If you have a tighter turn or something, we might go a little bit less, but generally that's what we target when we do trail design. So we added a definition for electric scooter. And had that as weighing less than 100 pounds, having handlebars, electric motor, and also a speed limit of 20 miles per hour. And that's the same as Cedar Rapids. Cedar Rapids was the only other city in the state that we knew of that had already adopted electric scooter regulations. So we looked at their code for guidance as well. Bird's definition had 150 pounds rather than 100. We went with the Cedar Rapids definition instead. Which
notes. Thank you.
we went with and the house file was also 100 pounds. So micromobility device, that one was a little trickier. We didn't find any code language that already had that defined. So we basically, if something's not defined, you go with a dictionary definition, but even that is not completely defined in a dictionary. So it's kind of adapted from that. I wanted to keep the speed limit at the 20 miles per hour speed limit. On that one, we did put 150 pounds for the device, but we really couldn't define like number of wheels or things like that. We did say that it was designed for individual use. And I don't know if you all are familiar with all the different kinds of micromobility devices. I could show you some if you, maybe I should just go ahead and do that. So can you see, I just pulled a few things off the internet for examples. So there's scooters like this, that it's still a scooter, but this one has a seat, so you can sit down or you could stand up, but you can see it's still limited to 15.5 miles per hour. GoTrax has scooters, hoverboards, and of course electric bicycles. So we're thinking of things like this, hoverboards. And then these are called one wheels, and these have been seen around the metro area. And this is something, the user balances on, and they can, some people are taking these off-road onto dirt trails too, which is presenting a whole nother problem. So we want to address some of that too. So I just kind of want to give you an idea of the range of micromobility devices and how we kind of want to try to encompass all of those in one thing, so we don't have to list, 15 different types of devices. And we need to, I guess, figure out what makes sense sort of in a collective way for all of those things. So I did add in here also motorized bicycle. The state code has a definition of a motorized bicycle, which puts it into a whole nother category because it goes up to 39 miles per hour. I wanted to mention this because there's also something called a class 3 electric bicycle, which also can go up to 28 miles per hour. And I think once you get into that over 20 miles per hour zone, like you're going 28 miles per hour, you're kind of, we're not really wanting to see that on trails or on sidewalks and all of that stuff. So we want to kind of classify that separately. So that's why we have that in there. And I said that the class 3 electric bicycle definition would fall under the motorized bicycle. I guess that's my opinion. So if you want a legal interpretation, maybe you could try that. But I believe based on what's written for the definition of both of those, that a class 3 electric bicycle would be a motorized bicycle per the state code. And then of course, we also defined what a multi-use trail is, which would be allow bikes and pedestrians and these micromobility devices. And it would be designated on sort of your city's official map what is or isn't a trail. And this can get tricky if you have, say, if you have a sidewalk that's 8 feet wide, and then some people might think it's a trail, some people think it's a sidewalk. So if it's on your map, then that would be what would be official as a trail. And then the last definition is the other power-driven mobility devices. So about 10 years ago or so, the U.S. Department of Justice sort of put out this statement that local governments can't restrict the use of other power-driven mobility devices that are used by people with mobility disabilities. So if someone has a mobility disability, they can use essentially any device that they want to get anywhere they want on public property. So whether that's on the sidewalk or on the grass, and even inside buildings, if their chosen mobility device is a Segway or one of these scooters or whatever the case may be, per this ruling, that has to be allowed. So we wanted to be sure that it was clear that we were not trying to prohibit other power-driven mobility devices. Now, there is a little bit of constraint you can put on that. So if they say, hey, my mobility device is a motorcycle, you can say, whoa, our trail is not designed for motorcycles and that's not safe. So there is some constraint that you can put on that, but it has to be sort of laid out in your city policies. And we haven't seen it when it first happened about 10 years ago. All of the trail managers were really concerned that it was going to go a little bit crazy and see a lot of abuse of it, and we really have not seen people abuse that ruling. So I'm not too concerned that people are going to try to do something strange with that rule. So the scope of regulations applies to basically everywhere on streets, sidewalks, bike lanes. The traffic code applies when they're being used on the street or in a bike lane. They're not subject to registration, titling, inspection, that sort of thing. You're not required to have a driver's license to use them. And when you get off of it, you're a pedestrian. So that's pretty clear. This one here is the first one that I noted could be controversial. So some of the model bike ordinances suggest that if you're on the street and you come to a signal and the signal isn't turning green for you, because if you're on a bike sometimes, or if you're on a mobility micromobility device, you might not trigger that signal to change. So if it seems inoperative or it's not changing, the idea is that you could kind of look for traffic, see if it's safe to proceed, and then proceed. Obviously, that's controversial. We did share this with the police chief, and he recommended getting rid of that section, as I noted in the kind of the blue highlight there. So that was really the first thing that I wanted your feedback on, how you feel about that. Do you agree that we should strike that? I don't see any huge issue with striking that. Generally.
Does everybody understand kind of what that says on there as well too? And I talked to our public works director on that today too, just to kind of give some background on it. So typically, if you're not aware, those sensors that are at intersections, they're there. They've got, it's almost like a magnet that can detect, like a chunk of metal sitting on it, which is typically the car. ever catch that. And then, you know, sometimes motorcycles might not even catch those either. So it's there. I see some benefit to it personally. Talking from somebody who bikes, I've done that before because sometimes you just don't trigger stoplights. At the same time, there are crosswalks at most of our intersections that have lights too. So that's an alternative if somebody doesn't feel safe. But yeah, I think that's one, as Mindy and I talked about this, and then we discussed it with our police chief, that I think we'd like some feedback on and what everybody's feelings are on that.
So would we want to modify number 5 so it said something differently rather than striking it all together?
Yeah, I mean, I see benefit to that as well, I guess, but depends, I guess, on how we want to word it or what we want to say.
Well, what Mindy brought up was an example of it, of you know, if you're not, you know, setting off the, you know, the signal, how do you know that you're not, or you are, or how long do you think, you know, waiting a signal you should wait? I mean, it just seems very hard to judge personally, you know, if you're waiting too long or not. And then I don't know how you ever enforce it. Like, I don't know how a cop could, unless he was sitting at the intersection, saw you go through it. I don't know. It just seems, I mean, the flip side is if you don't have it in there, then the cop can pull you over, right? and cite you. So.
Right. And I think as, you know, as you plan your infrastructure upgrades, there are ways to improve signals so that they can detect bicycles. There's loop detectors you can put in to detect them. There's things that can be on the signal that light up to show that and I think these are actually still technically experimental, but there's a light that can show up that tells the user that it's been triggered. So there is, you know, our smart sort of transportation technology is improving, and there's ways to make this situation better, but until you upgrade all your signals or, you know.
Charlie, where are we at with that in town? How many intersections do we really have like that are smart signals in a sense?
I don't know the answer to exactly how many we have. I mean, the timing upgrade that we did, that was completed last summer, but that was mainly to there was a major fault in the line that kind of goes from the north side of town to the south side of town that needed to be fixed. So that was kind of a big thing. Plus, then we retimed everything. So essentially, what it's trying to do is to get traffic from north to south, south to north, whatever direction you may be going, and you're missing as many red lights as possible. Sometimes the downside of that is that if you're sitting on one of the cross streets, you might have to sit through a cycle, and I know some of those cycles can be upwards of 90 to 120 seconds. So we haven't upgraded many. I think that's something that we look at as we kind of go along. I know we are aware of the traffic signals that we have that are deficient and need upgrading, but just one of those things that we kind of have to wait till budget allows on some of them.
So is that one you want to kind of think about for a little bit and then want me to move on? And
just for my information, do we have something in our code about just standard bicycles right now?
Yeah, so most of what we have in here that is not the underlying portions is all existing code.
So right now we don't have a stipulation that allows us to, if the light's too long to go.
No. Nope.
But everybody does it.
Sure.
Yeah, and their alternative would be,
To legalize it.
Yeah.
no, or to.
Wait till a car comes in, sets it off.
Yeah.
Wait,
I
or
think-
go to the sidewalk and push the
Yes.
button and.
Yep.
go to the sidewalk and push the button, I think is if there is a button at the sidewalk, yeah, that's typically the alternative.
Well, it
So
seems-
really, this is limited to the two highways, right? There's no other lights in town that I know of, I don't think. You know, So that's a safety issue in itself. I mean, it's a state highway. There's a lot of traffic. It makes sense that you should wait for your signal to go across the highway. But
Yeah, that's almost like a safety section, right? Like maybe that's where it belongs, is something related to the safety. And that is that you either go up to the signal and push the button in the crosswalk, or that you wait for her car to set it off, and that it applies to highways. Might even be a good call out too, that it's related to signals and highways.
It does specifically say that you have to, as long as it's clear or reasonably or whatever, but I would think that would be safer than waiting for a car to approach you.
Well, think about it. We can move on and kind of keep going through the rest of it and circle back around at the end here.
can I ask one question while we're talking? I didn't read through all of this, but quite a bit of it. Is there any regulations on age for riding these different types of vehicles? Seems a little strange.
No, I mean, just if you think, you know, a little kid can ride a bicycle, so yeah. And they design,
Right.
so the Bird scooter has their own rules about who can rent their scooters, but as far as, you know, you can go to the store and purchase a scooter for your, you know, they're designed for like 8-year-olds, some of them. Some of the, you know, smaller electric scooters are, so there's not an age requirement.
So the safety issue is really in the hands of the parents, right?
Mm-hmm.
No kids, you're not going to be on the street with that, or yeah, okay.
So this other section is added again from some of the model bike ordinances, and I noted this one, it was in the Cedar Rapids ordinance, and this section is directed towards motorists and how they're supposed to behave around bicycles. So first of all, it's giving right of way to people using the bike lane. So if you're biking in the bike lane or using a scooter in the bike lane, the motorist is supposed to yield to that person in the bike lane. Number 2 here is the controversial one, change lanes to pass. That's something that the Iowa Bicycle Coalition has been advocating for, along with this lateral passing distance. So basically that's saying if a bicyclist is using the roadway and they're not in the bike lane and you need to pass them, that you're actually supposed to change lanes to pass them rather than trying to pass them within the lane, because you get pretty darn close to the bicyclist if you're trying to pass within the same lane. The lateral passing distance one is where if the person biking is in a bike lane or on a shoulder, you're supposed to give 3 feet of space. So like I said, change lanes to pass is controversial, probably more controversial than the lateral passing distance one, because sometimes it's hard to change lanes. You have oncoming traffic, so that's a pretty hard thing to do. And the police chief did recommend striking that. I would say if we do choose to strike that one, that I would modify the lateral passing distance one to give 3 feet when passing someone biking in the travel lane as well, not just someone in a bike lane. So I would modify that one a little bit to kind of make up for that issue. Before we talk about that, just to kind of go on, the other couple of items here is opening doors. So a major hazard for people biking is people who are parked parallel on the road opening up their door and the bicyclist runs into the door, and that's called dooring. So this is just saying that the motorist has a responsibility to look behind them before opening the door, and to basically not just sit with the door wide open unless they're kind of actively getting in and out or loading things in and out. The other issue is yielding to people in crosswalks. So this is kind of interesting that our state code right now says that motorists have to yield to pedestrians in crosswalks. It does not say that motorists have to yield to bicycles in crosswalks. So apparently you can run them down. So this would make it clear that yes, you have to also yield to someone who's on a bicycle in a crosswalk or on a scooter, etc. And so that, I think that's a good item to add. So if we want to talk about our controversial one, change lanes to pass, does anyone have any comments on that?
Yeah, I like the idea of changing the wording on the change lanes to pass from like shall to saying encouraged or something like that. So it's not like a mandate or, the thing that seems odd to me, and I don't know how this is, if this is when you bring these things out into a community, these new, guides for riding, how people get educated with that. This is kind of new material that you didn't learn in driver's ed. So how is Joe Public supposed to know these rules? How is there some kind of public education that's given, or there's some nights where you're invited to come and learn that kind of stuff?
Yeah, that would be an excellent idea. Yes. So Charlie and I haven't talked about that specifically. I will say, like, I live here in West Des Moines, and when they painted the shared lane markings on the road, they made little bookmarks, and they just like, I think your Parks and Rec puts out do you put out a little program of events? A lot of cities do, I guess. I don't know for sure what you all do. But
publication with seasons.
Yep. So using tools like that, so like West Des Moines has a quarterly magazine. It has an inset for Parks and Rec, but they actually come more than just Parks and Rec, and they put a huge educational thing in there about shared lane markings. So absolutely, there needs to be education, especially if there's something brand new like change lanes to pass that most people aren't familiar with. You have to spread the word, and then you can always kind of give a grace period too as things are coming online. But yes, that's
I think drivers usually are, in Iowa are pretty good about changing lanes if a vehicle's on the shoulder. I mean, it just seems like common knowledge or common etiquette we do already. So it doesn't seem that far out to say that. I just don't know, again, it's the shell thing, and how many people, if you didn't know about the code and you get pulled over, well, I didn't know, I don't know.
Right. If you're not from the town, I think that's my concern too, is one, if you're not from the city, you didn't get educated on what that city's rules are. And I think my question too is, when you put something like this in code, and how is that enforced from a police perspective? So would you get pulled over if you didn't change lanes? And then is there a ticket that goes with it? And the police would 100% always enforce that because we put that into our code?
That's a great question for your police department, how they want to enforce it.
I can jump in on that really quick too. I mean, yeah, ultimately it would be up to PD and enforcement. Do they enforce it? When they enforce it, how they enforce it would be at their discretion. State code and our code of ordinances does give them kind of a set fine schedule on what they can dish out if they potentially do pull somebody over for breaking that law. And it's just a normal traffic citation that then can be appealed to court in front of a judge and all that process. So it would be similar to a speeding ticket or a stop sign ticket or something to that effect.
So what do you do on your main streets within your town from that perspective too, when there's not technically a lane to change into? I think that's where I'm hung up with the wording, and just one, thinking about applying this to real life is only our city residents would get educated, and B, how do you handle it when there's 2-lane traffic, one-way traffic, because we have several one-ways in our city, and just side streets that aren't a highway and aren't a 2-lane highway.
Yeah, I think if you were on a side street where there's not room to pass, then you wouldn't be able to pass. I mean, you'd be stuck there. If it's just 2 lanes, you'd pass into the oncoming traffic just like if you were passing a car. So basically it's just saying you have to pass the bike the same way you would pass a car. You can't squeeze them off to the side.
Sure. I think that's where modification of 3 might be a better fit. if we do something more significant with 3 and strike 2.
The other thing I would say is like if we, sorry, my dog gets really feisty around this time of day. If we, I wouldn't recommend changing something to a should or may, because then there's not really a need for it to be in the code then. You know, basically the code is for things that are required. So if it's a should or may, then I think it's going to fall into the etiquette category.
What have you seen in other cities in Iowa that implemented this?
I don't think anyone has the change lanes to pass in their codes yet.
Okay.
Not that I'm aware of. Like I said, that's something that's been kind of part of the Iowa Bike Coalition's sort of request to the state to put in the state code.
I have one more comment just from what I'd call vice versa perspective, and maybe we'll get to that, and I might have missed it. My first review is what's the requirements from the driver of the scooter? What's their responsibility? Is their responsibility to stay in that right-hand lane when you don't have a bike lane, et cetera?
That's basically covered in an upcoming section with place of writing. So we'll get there in a little bit.
Okay.
And we can talk about that. But generally, if you think we should, take out the change lanes to pass and add that into the lateral passing distance, we can do that. This next section, actions against bicycles and micromobility devices, this is in the state code also as actions against bicycles. So I just basically copied that same thing and added the micromobility devices to it. And it basically says you just, can't purposefully do anything to try to sort of intimidate or put a bicyclist in danger. Can't drive too close or throw anything at them, which has happened. Sometimes people are, for whatever reason, not happy to see bicycles out on the road. So this is the section that partly gets to what you were talking about as far as responsible riding. So double riding restricted, that was in your previous code, so I kept that. Before it was its own section, I just made it a subsection under responsible riding. So basically it's just saying only have the number of people that the device is designed for on the device. Speed, I just copied from another section, basically saying just be reasonable and prudent. Control of device, I changed a little bit from, there's a section about carrying articles, which it seemed kind of goofy. It basically said you can't carry something if you can't hold on to the handlebars. And I thought, well, is it really about carrying things, or is it really just about controlling what you're driving? So I thought this was just simpler, that it just says you have to maintain control of your device. Improper riding, basically just don't be reckless. Right of way, this is saying that electric devices need to yield to non-electric devices and pedestrians. And passing, so this says you have to give an audible signal, and this is another one that I wanted to talk about because I thought that could also be considered etiquette. And a lot of times we say, on your left or passing or whatever as you're passing someone. But what it needs to be in the code kind of seemed questionable. So, and yeah, the police chief recommended going ahead and striking that, because that's another one that would be, I don't know how you would enforce that unless the police officer is right there to not hear something. So we might want to get rid of that.
Passing a police officer, you might get caught. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and then how do you prove you didn't say something, then they just didn't hear you? So I'd be quite okay with getting rid of that one. It was, I think that was in one of the model, well, it was in the House File 500. And it might have been in the model ordinance as well. I can't remember for sure, but so I put it in there so we could talk about it, but I thought, yeah, that one, that's a tough one. I don't know how you enforce that. Now we're getting to more of what you were asking about, Sarah. So first of all, there was a requirement to ride single file and not be more than 2 side by side in like on trails or in bike lane. So change that a little. Basically, I just got rid of that part. I think there's probably a lot of places where 2 cyclists could ride side by side, especially like on a low volume or lower speed road, and you probably do see people doing that. And some people feel safer that way. You know, if you're more visible on the roadway, and they might be going the same speed even as motorists, depending on where it's at. So it seemed maybe not necessary to have that. And then we have this sort of lengthy section about place of riding.
Can I ask
So
a
basically
question?
saying, yeah. So
Hey, Mindy, I
Yeah,
got one question here.
the part about riding abreast, is that just on the roadway or is that also on trails? I'm referring to 76.04.
yeah, so that would be, well, basically I struck that entire section. So you'd be able to ride 2 abreast essentially wherever, as the plan with the other regulations.
I think you do say roadways in the yellow. I don't know if that includes trails or what's the definition of roadway?
No, I wasn't talking about trails there. So the code that you have already allows 2 abreast on paths. So you're allowed to do two abreast on trails already.
So Mindy, would you be recommending we just strike the content altogether, correct? So it doesn't matter, even what if there was 3 people, 4 people,
Right.
etc.
Yeah, it's a big,
I think,
it's a big pain when you're
yeah.
riding the trail. You come up on those 2 abreast or 3 abreast.
Yeah.
Dinking along.
Yep.
It's a problem area.
And it's another, I think it's another trail etiquette issue. And so maybe there needs to be a trail etiquette campaign. And I don't know what kind of trail signage you have, if you have trail etiquette signage or whatever. I'm not sure how much it helps anyway, but yeah. I know I like to ride side by side so I can talk, but then we try to get single file when there's oncoming bicyclists too.
Yeah, I like the idea of etiquette. I mean, that goes into our education factor, right? If we do a good job of educating the code altogether and put it in etiquette, then that'll hopefully help a little bit of that.
And Doug, you're on here as well. Do we have any signage on the trails? I know I see them all the time, but I'm not sure if we have any.
There's really not any etiquette signage as you speak about, so just has the general rules, open and closed and yield and that, that kind of thing. But we've had issues. We talked about traffic where bicyclists think that, they just go right across the street and cars don't pay attention to bicyclists going across the street, even at a crosswalk. So it comes to that education factor. And I know we put more signs up on the streets, but again, it's still responsibility of the bicyclist that 4,000-pound car is going to hurt if I don't watch out for it. And it is, as Mindy says, it's really odd that the state code is okay for, you have to yield to pedestrians, but you don't have to yield to bicyclers. So
I think they were just forgotten in the process.
It's probably one of those things never ever been changed and no one ever questioned.
Yeah. So under place of riding, basically we're saying they can be operated on the road, in the bike lane, or on a trail. subject to everything else that we have in this chapter. Um,
And
on unpaved trails, I'm sorry, was there another question?
sidewalks,
Yes. So we have,
yeah. What if
I don't
there
have
was an-
sidewalks
what
in
if
that
there was an
section.
age limit on riding on the sidewalk?
so I have sidewalks down here in a separate item.
Oh, okay. I'm jumping ahead.
No, you're fine. Maybe it should be listed there too. I'm trying to remember if I had a reason for not listing it there. Maybe just because I did list it separately with some more caveats. So the unpaved trails, so if you had any dirt trails or granular trails, we're going to say that bicycles and, you know, human powered devices, not the electric scooters, would be allowed, unless it's the other power mobility device, then they would be allowed, provided that they don't risk damage to the trail. So that's where I was talking about earlier, is that, you know, you can put some caveat on that. So that's something, I don't know, do you have any dirt trails? I don't recall. No. Any plans for any dirt trails?
We've talked about it. We have some grass trails, so this
Okay.
definitely would be
Would
there.
apply to that.
But if people would want to use them, they certainly could, as long as they're not gonna pose a damage to the trail at Pickard or Denelsky Park or somewhere else. So
Right. So that might be something that you'd want to address policy-wise. I don't think it needs to be in the code, but if there's a grass trail or unpaved trail that you definitely don't want something, say, of a certain size or a certain speed, to have some sort of policy that addresses that.
Yep.
And then the sidewalk. So this is another sort of item for discussion. So what I drafted here was that they would be allowed on sidewalks in a careful and prudent manner. And that they would have to yield right of way when approaching a pedestrian. And this one has the audible signal thing too, which we just talked about. And maybe that part should be taken out, although I think that is, like I said, good etiquette. So as bicycles generally everywhere are allowed on sidewalks, with sometimes the exception of sort of downtown areas. And as far as the scooters, there was some research done a year, or I guess close to 2 years ago now, where the MPO and some project partners sort of surveyed a bunch of communities that had the electric scooter share, and they addressed, you know, asked them whether or not they allowed the electric scooters on sidewalks. Some did, some didn't. Some prohibited them only in their downtown areas. So it was not consistent across the board. So each city is going to have a different regulation about that. The one, I did note this one comment where the city said, yeah, we don't allow them on sidewalks, but they're there anyway. So especially if there's not, if they don't feel like there's a safe place on the road, they're going to jump up onto the sidewalk and feel safer. The police chief's comment on this one also was to not allow them on sidewalks around the square, which is what you have in your code right now. And so I guess the question is, do you think they could be allowed on the square, provided that they're complying with the rest of what this says, a careful and prudent manner, and yielding to pedestrians if they encounter a pedestrian?
Okay, I'll jump in. No, I don't think they should be allowed around the square, and I don't think they should be allowed on sidewalks. None of them, unless they're under the age of 14.
I disagree with.
I disagree.
Yeah.
I've ridden these on downtowns on sidewalks.
Streets. I mean, I think I've ridden them in like probably 6 different communities. And I think the way that it was written is on here as an example is appropriate.
I would agree. And any company like Bird who is attracted to our community to set up these scooters for people to jump on and take themselves, you know, 6 or 7 blocks in a town, I see them on the sidewalks. They're parked on the sidewalk. People jump on them and ride them on the sidewalk. It is the primary place. But I also see people being following etiquette and giving the right of way to the person walking and just being a good steward of it.
I think there's also a difference of when I've been to cities with them, a major city riding on the sidewalk is different than riding on the sidewalk in Indianola. I think that just for the traffic of if you could ride them on the sidewalk, but when you got to the square, you then were on the street where traffic is moving slower and it's not like, thinking of like, even if you were in downtown Des Moines, let's say, right? Where if you were on a busy street on Ingersoll's a bad example because they have a bike lane, but somewhere where there is, if the street traffic is busy, I can see how where the sidewalk makes sense. On somewhere the square where you always have people coming and going out of doorways and somebody coming on a scooter, it's hard enough with a bike. I think that's where I could see them then on the street. But if you were going to go down Iowa, you're probably safer on the sidewalk / bike trail than you are being on the road,
You'd still have the option on the street though, with this. It's just, you could
be on the street.
but you
Yes.
could pull up onto the sidewalk and park and.
Oh, yeah.
whereas You couldn't.
Yeah.
If they were prohibited.
Yes. Are they talking about just parking them or riding them?
Riding.
Riding.
Yeah.
I think the other thing to keep in mind is our square is about to become a 2-way traffic. So keeping that in mind, that's less safe from someone who's required to be in the street on one of these versus having the option to be on the sidewalk.
I think they're safer on 2-way traffic. I have no basis to back that up. I just think on the sidewalk on the square with like signs and people coming and going and I don't know.
Let's hope it's not busy.
Right. Well, people coming, just coming out of doorways where somebody's not expecting it and somebody on a motorized scooter, or it happens on kids on bikes or anybody on a bike, right? That you're moving faster and someone's stepping out onto the sidewalk, not expecting to see somebody approaching them. I don't know. I don't know what the answer is there, but there's things to think about.
Charlie, in the plans for the square updates, is the sidewalk increasing in width?
Yeah, with the caveat that we're also trying to create more vibrancy on the sidewalks as well too. So the increase is meant for, bistro tables, sales racks, signs, things like that. So yeah, so while we're increasing the sidewalk width, the actual walkable portion at any one time probably is going to be about the same. And then you also have to remember too, we're going to have some planter boxes, things like that are going to be incorporated in that. So
And no bike lanes are incorporated in the plan for the square.
no, we didn't have the width to do standalone bike lanes in that.
So with the,
not a lane of parking, which would have been.
if we said specific to the square, sorry if this is what I'd call a dumb question, but I think we'd have to be specific. Is the square literally the 4 couple blocks on each side of our county courthouse? Or if, I'll think of like Bob's Custom Trophy. They say they're on the square. Are they on the square though? They're 2 blocks down from what I would call the primary square. So I think if we say the square, I think we need to define what the square is.
Yeah.
Well, what about with the way that this is worded? It says, except where signs are erected prohibiting riding on sidewalks. Is it something that makes it kind of open, that if there's an issue, then signs can be erected?
Yeah, I put that in there and then it's something that,
It said no bicycles on the square.
We still have sidewalk markings in a few
Well, you
areas.
can't see them
Yeah.
anymore, but yeah,
So
they're
we don't
there.
maintain them.
Prohibited, so, but, yes. I mean,
Yeah, I know what you're saying, yeah.
I mean, how else are you gonna educate people not to ride on the square if you don't put up signage?
Yeah.
Because otherwise people are just gonna assume that they can ride wherever they want to. Right.
And really quick, just because Sarah mentioned and I was thinking about it, we do have, there's areas in our sign code where we allow certain sign regulations within the square, but it goes beyond the limits of the square, and we actually define those areas as the blocks of the square. Each of the blocks within the square has a number associated with it. So we've said, you know, like blocks 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, all are subject to these types of regulations. So if we were going to define what that area would be, because I think it makes sense, you know, we don't want to probably just look at the 4 sides of the square if we're going to do this. I mean, you know, the fingers of the square, as I've commonly referred to them, are going to have the same issues as the square does. So, but yeah, I mean, if that ultimately, if that's the direction we want to head, I think from staff standpoint, we can kind of massage that to define that area, if that is an area we want to lock down.
And then if we did that as far as not allowing them on the sidewalks around the square, would you then want to allow children using bicycles or other devices on the sidewalk on the square?
No.
Or are we prohibiting everybody?
I agree.
I don't like that idea. I mean, you're trying to encourage people to use the square, and not everybody's going to be walking. And you're going to basically prohibit people like kids from riding bikes because it's unsafe for them to be on the street. I don't know. It seems like we're really trying to restrict use of the square.
I think it's etiquette though, that you get to the square and you get off your bike and you walk your bike across the square if you're wanting to go somewhere. I guess to me, that's what it means when it doesn't mean you can't ride your bike to the square. It just means that you get up there, you're gonna have to get off your bike and walk your bike around the square to go wherever it is you're wanting to go. Or ride in the street. But if you have little kids, if I had a kid with me riding a bike, I would get off and walk. I would teach them to walk across the square with the bike. But I mean, I don't know how you can, to me, little kids are just as dangerous as adults because they're the ones, if the parents aren't watching them, they're the ones that are going to go scoot across in front of a door and get knocked down when somebody's coming out of a building.
Yeah, I think that the motorized mobility devices, you can't really walk those. They're 100 pounds. So I agree from a bicyclist perspective, but it's not feasible with those devices to get off and walk. So you would be forcing them into the street as a child.
And then you also have to have places to park the bikes, bike racks at the corners of the square, and you know, to lock them, and you know, you'd have to provide spaces for that to happen.
Those are parking spaces, Charlie.
I'll lock them under the planters.
Does your streetscape,
Go ahead, Mindy, sorry.
does your streetscape have bike parking in the plan already?
We've got bike racks associated in it, yes, but not kind of standalone bike parking necessarily.
Okay.
The other thing I was going to add too, especially on the e-scooters, what really triggered this is if we do pass these ordinances, there is a process with the company to get into essentially, I don't want to call it a lease agreement because that's not fair, but some sort of agreement with the city where we would outline a lot of that stuff. You know, what happens if, for example, they get dumped on somebody's front yard? What do we do with them? How do we take care of them? How are they maintained? What happens if one of them is broken down or the charge runs out of them? How are those maintained? So there is a separate agreement that we would get in with these companies that really outlines a lot of that stuff. And then we also are able to essentially geofence a boundary where they're allowed and where they're not allowed, things like that. So we can look at specific areas. For example, we don't want them on Jefferson, you know, if that makes a lot of sense. And we're able to kind of set those boundaries on them where they weren't allowed. But we're not reviewing that as part of this ordinance. I just want to make sure everybody is aware that that is a process that goes on with these companies.
What is the term of the lease? I mean, is it 12 months or how does that work?
Yeah, I'd have to look at it again. I'm not 100% sure. My guess would be that it's open until either party decides that they no longer want to be a part of it. But that's something we'd have our legal team reviews to make sure that it would be rather favorable to us if something does happen. We no longer want them here.
Yeah, what concerns me is, let's say it becomes an unsafe thing, we have people getting hurt and stuff, and now we recognize we've made a mistake and we want to end this thing.
Yep.
Do we have that opportunity?
Yeah, I would think that we would, and we'll work to make sure that we do. And there's no money being exchanged here by the city for bringing them in or for Bird to allow them. We could look at licensing and stuff like that. That is an option that we have, but nothing that the city would have to pay for to have them here, other than the time involved in everybody reviewing these ordinances. So I feel like just to get some consensus on this last item here that we're talking about, it kind of feels like we're trying to weigh the pros and cons of allowing them on the square versus not allowing them on the square. So I don't know if we've got a clear answer on this or if anybody else has got any feedback on it, but
I don't know. I think it's hard to try to find the right thing that meets the needs of everything, right? Because yes, of course, we want to encourage them to come to the square, but Monday, there was a kindergarten girl on an electric scooter, and she's of course riding on the sidewalk because she's sort of like walking with her parents. And then there's the guy that rides his one-wheeler on the street around the square. So, which those are, he's 20 something. And then I think that's very different than the 8-year-old on the electric scooter, which probably doesn't even go 20 miles an hour, is different than a Bird scooter that goes 20. That, I don't know how you of course wouldn't want your 8-year-old or 5-year-old, however old she was, in the street by herself riding it. So it makes sense for her to be on the sidewalk. I don't know.
I mean, the reality, so I don't know how they were setting this thing up. What were they thinking about Indianola? Were these things going to be, were they kind of looking at locations for these things to, where the rent areas would be where you'd access them? I mean, did they even?
I think the major reason they reached out to us, I think they looked at a few things, but having a healthy population as they saw it, a business district and a college all kind of played into it. So I think those are some of the areas that we looked at. I think as we've kind of discussed it a little bit, it's, how is there areas that make sense? Do you allow a Simpson College student to get on an e-scooter and take it to the Balloon Museum, for example, or to Pickard Park or anything like that via the trail? So, something that we'll have to look at. But again, I think their reason for reaching out had a lot to do with population, business district, plus Simpson College.
It seems like it seems more appropriate and maybe a bigger city where you have neighborhoods that surround a downtown area or something like that, that I might live 5 blocks from downtown, and boy, if they had a little scooter rentable place in my neighborhood, I could zip up to the square and get something to eat, and come back. It just seems odd that, I don't know where you'd place them, right? I mean, if you place them on the square, then it's just something to circulate later on the square with. I mean, it just doesn't seem like people would even use it if it's just around the square. It seemed like they'd have to be coming from somewhere to a destination and going back to make sense of it. It seems like, unless you just casually want to ride these things around the square, but.
Isn't that part of it though? I mean, if there's not a demand, they'll take them away.
Yeah, and that's just the rental companies. I mean, we're seeing more and more people just who own these in general. So take out that fact that there's a company that is interested in bringing it to our city. We're seeing more and more people just owning their own personal.
And I think that's a good point too. And hopefully I hit that kind of in the beginning, was we had a request from this company. We decided to take a really holistic look at every regulation that we have associated with these, not just to focus on the company that had the request.
Yeah, it's probably a little short-sighted.
No, that's not what I meant.
That rental thing. So no, I agree. Holistically, I think it makes sense. I agree with Sarah. But.
Okay. So maybe Charlie and I will talk some more about the use around the square, and should we move on to the next item?
Yeah, let's finish it out. We can kind of go back to some of those items and follow up real quick.
Okay. I added this this section about the class 3 electric bicycles, meeting the definition of a motorized bicycle. So that is in the state code, that essentially says that they can be ridden to abreast in a single traffic lane, just like you see motorcycles do, or you might see mopeds do. I commented here, we might not need to include this if you just rely on state code to kind of cover that issue, but I put it up there for consideration. This next section is kind of lengthy. So again, the black is what you have in your code right now that basically says that if you're biking, you need to stay as far to the right as practicable, to the right-hand edge of the road. So we've created this list of exceptions, which is in some of the model bike ordinances. Before we get into that, I did want to mention, I noted, right before the meeting, I was looking back at one of the model bike ordinances, and it changed this language too. So it doesn't say operated as near as practicable to the right-hand edge. It just says in the right half of the roadway, which I think is probably better. And I would maybe want to change that to say that as well. It gives a little bit more flexibility to where that person is riding, instead of making them feel like you have to get as far to the right as you physically can. Basically, you can ride a little bit more so where you're comfortable riding, and actually more visible to motorists. So the exceptions also are if you're passing someone, if you're going to turn left, if you need to avoid any sort of road hazards, if there's a bike facility on the left side of the road, if there's shared lane markings on the road, which are typically put in the line of travel. If you're going through an intersection that has a right turn lane, you don't want to be in the right turn lane, you want to be in the through lane. If there's parallel parked vehicles that might open their doors into your space, so you want to be away from the cars. If there's an advanced stop line, so if you're not familiar with this, there's bike boxes that basically you put, usually probably a signalized intersection where you can allow the bicyclist to get out in front of the traffic. This one is a little bit different. So this is saying if you have two lanes of traffic going in the same direction, that the bicyclist could be in the left lane. And then the last one is basically saying if you had, say you had a one-way road and then you had a bike lane going the opposite direction, they could be in that bike lane going the opposite direction. So some of these things I noted in the comment, you don't have in Indianola, so you might not need them right now. However, you might want to build one day. So that's kind of your decision too. If you want to include things that address things like contraflow bike lanes or bike boxes that you don't have in the city right now. They wouldn't necessarily need to be in your ordinance right now, but if you did develop some of those in the future, then you'd probably want to amend the ordinance to acknowledge that. Are there any questions about this section? I can't get all of it on the screen at the same time. I can make it smaller, but then you might not be able to read it.
I think we're good on that one.
Okay, I'll go ahead and move on then. So the speed, I had moved to that responsible riding section. Emerging from an alley or driveway, I kept that the same. I just added the scooters and micromobility devices. This is the section I commented on earlier about carrying articles. I changed that to maintaining control of the device because that just seems strange. Why are we talking about carrying articles? This is the section that you had in the code about riding on sidewalks that I had deleted and then added the other section that we just spent some time talking about. Towing, I added a section about saying that you can't hang on to the back of a vehicle and be towed. Before, there was only the part that says that you can't tow someone else if you're riding a bike, unless that device is designed to do so. So you can have a burly or what, a tag along or whatever on the bike. It's designed to do that. And improper riding, that's also moved to the responsible riding section. So parking, there's quite a bit of changes here. So essentially, we're saying that you can park on the street near the curb, between the sidewalk and the road, in a designated parking area, against the wall of a building, to not obstruct pedestrian traffic and not to obstruct clear movement in accordance with Americans with Disabilities Act. So we certainly don't want to block any access. And so to make that a little bit clearer, there's a whole section that I added to say where you can't park. So you can't block a fire hydrant or a mailbox, crosswalk or curb ramp. That's per sort of ADA guidelines as well. Loading zones, transit, accessible parking spaces. So I suppose that one would, well, I was going to say maybe with the other power-driven mobility devices, but maybe that's a question. You're not to block access to street furniture or anything that requires pedestrian access. So like if you had a signage or something that people need to walk up to read entryways and driveways. So I don't have any specific questions on those for you. Do you have any questions for me about any of the parking requirements?
Excuse me, I think I missed it. Back on the part about towing something, 76.10, number 2.
Mm-hmm.
Would you, I don't have a copy in front of me. Would you tell me what that's proposed to say?
So there's two parts. The first part is saying that you can't use your bicycle or scooter to tow something else, or you can't, sorry, I said that wrong. You can't, if you're on a bike or scooter or device, you can't like hang on to the back of a car and let it pull you around town.
Okay.
Like, that's a bad idea. The other part is saying that you can't use your bike or scooter to tow something else unless it's designed specifically to do that. So you can't kind of jerry rig something up. You can do something, you can have a burly with a, or a tag along or whatever. You
I don't
can't
know
just
what
sort
those
of.
are. You mean like with the little kids? behind?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Yep, the little thing with the little kid in it.
Okay, thank you.
Burly's I think they're both brand names, so I don't know what they're called sort of generically.
So Al, you can still use your skateboard and hold on to the back of a pickup bumper.
Yeah, okay. So you can't, your
there's
naked
that.
kid can't tie the wagon to the back of the bike and tow the little brother down the street in the wagon.
No.
It'll happen.
Did you look at that?
It always has, it'll happen.
So we're moving along. Equipment requirements. So the state code does require a light if you're biking in the dark, and it requires a rear light or a red reflector on the back. So I modified this a little bit. Before, your code said at nighttime. That could be kind of subjective. So we just said between sunset and sunrise, or if the weather is poor. And then we allow for the reflector instead of the rear light. And what the state had been considering when they were considering that House file was also to require scooters have those same amenities, which makes sense. So I kept that in there. So some of this next section comes from the model bike ordinances. So one suggestion is that instead of having a light on your bike, you might have a light on your helmet, or instead of having a light on the back, you might have a reflector or light on the back of your helmet or on your backpack, or, you know, so that it doesn't have to be on the bike itself, essentially is what that's saying. The other part of this is sort of this concern that bicyclists in particular would be stopped for this and be given a ticket. And so they wanted to include this little bit of leeway here that says, okay, if someone is stopped for not having a bike light, that they have 72 hours to produce a light, and then they don't really have a citation at that point. So it gives them an out for that particular citation. Then this last one is about not having a siren or whistle. That's in the state code, so we just went ahead and copied that here. Certainly we don't want people biking or using a scooter to imitate a police officer's or an emergency vehicle siren. The stopping requirements, it used to, so the past code said that you had to have brakes on your bicycle. So we're saying you don't necessarily have to have brakes, but you have to be able to stop. So you have to be able to stop within 100 feet is the recommendation there. A class 3 electric bicycle has to have a speedometer. And then again, another class 3 regulation that applies to the motorized bicycles in the state code is that they have to have a flag on them. So again, similar to that other one that I pointed out, you might not need that if you just say, well, that's in the state code. And this is only applying to the class 3 bicycles, not to a regular bicycle and not to a scooter. And our very last thing is the special penalty, which was in your code, which allows the person's bicycle to be impounded rather than to pay a fine. I modified this, or I suggested modifying this just to have it be 5 days. Before it had 5 days for the first offense, 10 days for the second offense, 30 days for the third. I don't know that that's necessary. So I'm like, okay, how about we just make it 5 days and keep it sort of standard. And then also it wasn't clear. It sounds like the way this is written is that it's the person's choice of what they want to do, not the police officer's choice of what they're going to impose. So I kind of wanted to, I think for it to be more equitable, it would be the person's choice, whether like I can afford the fine or I can afford to be without a bike for 5 days, and let them choose which suits their life a little bit better. But that's it.
I have a question just in general. Can you be inebriated on a bike?
Technically not.
How about the other devices? But
Not a legal expert by any means, and this is going off a lot of what I've said, and maybe you know this, but I think Iowa's OWI laws apply to bikes as well.
They do.
how about scooters?
I would imagine.
Uniwheels?
I think the whole operating, it really does kind of encompass just a lot of things that
Okay.
you could be doing. And again, Mindy, I don't know if you have any more information on that, but
I would not. I'm not an expert on that. Thankfully, that hasn't been a hasn't been a problem for me. I would say public intoxication is still not allowed, no matter what you're doing. Right? You're not allowed to be drunk outside. So, if it's not an OWI, then it's at least public intox.
I am
so-
confident that there's nothing that we would have to put into this code. I think there's probably
Okay.
various other codes that would cover it, so. Anything else other than that? I mean, discussion was great. I think we've got kind of the feedback we need. I don't know if there's any particular points that we discussed that need to be brought back up, but I think we got some direction. Mindy, do you agree?
Yep.
All right.
Anything else, anybody?
Charlie, do you want to let everybody know kind of the next steps maybe, or
Yeah,
timing?
so the plan from here, we'll kind of go through and we'll make these changes. City council has a study session coming up next Monday that we will present this to them as well. Kind of let them know that both the Parks and Rec Commission and the Planning and Zoning Commission reviewed this. And kind of essentially signed off on these changes. And then from there, we get into writing the ordinance and having that get passed. So we keep on schedule right now. We're probably looking at late June where this could be in effect. So
And just so you know, we had to change our Parks and Recreation Commission meeting because of the council retreat tomorrow. So they'll take this up next Wednesday.
perfect.
Okay, moving on.
Thank you. And really just sorry, really quick,
Yeah.
Doug and the Parks and Rec Commission, thanks for joining us. You're more than welcome to stay on here, but we're gonna move into our last few items.
Thank you, everybody.
Yeah, thanks for,
And thank you, Mindy, as well.
Thanks, Mindy.
Yeah.
Thanks,
Thank
Mindy.
you.
B, consider a recommendation on request for approval of a final plat for DeArmond Park. Charlie?
Yeah, thank you. You'll recall your last meeting back in March, we discussed the DeArmond Ford and the possible renovation and addition they are doing to their facility. As part of their future business plans, they are looking at purchasing a piece of ground just to the rear of the dealership right there to allow them to expand out. When we say expand, I don't think there's going to be necessarily a building expansion, but possibly just some ground expansion back there for future parking lots and whatnot. So they have submitted a subdivision plat for that, as this is a subdivision that will not include any public infrastructure extensions or additions. We presented as a final plat. To note, one thing on there, we are getting some right of way for the future extension of Willowcrest Avenue through this. Not necessarily a time frame on when Willowcrest will be extended back there, but as part of that, we're going to have to acquire the right of way when we do it. So getting it through a subdivision plating process does make sense. So with that, we do recommend approval of this, subject to 3 conditions. That notes be added to the plat that show that lot 1 be transferred, or lot 1 will be transferred to the adjacent property owner to the west. This helps deal with any possibility of landlocking or anything right now. If we can tie that parcel back to the existing one that does have access to a public road. A note that added that will say that lot A will be dedicated to the city for future right-of-way Willowcrest. And then a note that notes the allowable air closure for a subdivision plat. I don't want to get into that too much in depth, but that is a state code requirement, and our code does require that that be made as a note on the plat. So any questions on this, I would be happy to answer them.
And any questions, or is Matt Thomas, the
Yeah.
surveyor, is on the Zoom as well? If he had any comments?
No, I don't. Thanks.
Well, would someone be ready to give us a motion?
Yes, I would move that we approve the request with, as stipulated in the staff recommendation. That is number 2.
I'd second the motion.
Do we have any further questions or discussion before we vote? Charlie?
Richie?
Yes.
Ferris,
Yes,
Freeberg,
Yes.
Needles,
Yes.
Ormsby,
Yes.
and Solish.
Yes. All right. The next item on the agenda, I need to recuse myself on, item 7C. So Sarah Ritchie, would you be able to take over on this one?
Yeah, and Sarah, I apologize for my standpoint. I didn't give you a heads up on this and I should have, so.
And is it
That's
okay
okay.
on the next one as well?
Okay. Yeah, we'll muddle through this together. So Charlie, do you want to go ahead and explain this one to us?
Yep, so TS Investments back in November presented a Plata survey to the Planning and Zoning Commission that was approved. They have now amended the Plata survey. Essentially, they are adding an acre of ground to the parcel to the north, and by doing such, decreasing an acre of ground to the parcel to the south. So as was the case back in November, this Plata survey is located outside of any growth area of the city. And as such, we don't have too much feedback on this, so we would just recommend that this be approved as presented.
Okay, do we have a motion?
I'll motion to approve the request as submitted to the city.
The second?
I'll second.
Charlie?
Ferris,
yes,
Freeberg,
Yes.
Needles,
Yes.
Ormsby,
Yes.
and Ritchie.
Yes.
Charlie? That's only 4 votes. Is that okay?
Nope, we got it because Becky came in. So
Oh, we do
we've got
have
5
5
now.
now.
Yep.
Good, okay, thank you.
Yeah, that
Sorry.
went through my head after we started this meeting.
Yeah, I lost
started
track.
figuring it out a
We
little
started
bit,
at 5:30,
Oh,
I
you are
apologize.
so critical.
but-
I'm sure.
Okay, our next agenda item is to consider the request for site plan approval of Williams Terrace, a residential multifamily development for senior citizens on a lot exceeding 1 acre located at 1603 North 9th Street. Charlie, can you give us some information?
Yeah, this one has been, as we talked just before this meeting, a project that's been ongoing for about a year now through a public meeting that started last March. Williams Terrace is proposing a 3-story, 50-unit apartment complex on this property. We have gone through a staff review on this one. The comments of that review were included in your staff report. A few minor outstanding issues, as I will call them. There's some comments regarding the detention basin that takes up quite a few of the comments on just getting some clarification from the developer on those, as well as just again, a few other minor things, clarifying if signage, site lighting, stuff like that is going to be used. And then just some minor stuff as far as the verbiage that's used on the site plan. Other than that, we did provide some main points of review on this. This is in the R4 zoning district. The commission will recall last year in, I believe it was May, you recommended the rezoning from the M2 district to the R4 district. This building will be located on 3.51 acres of land. It does propose 50 units. That gives a density of about 14.25 units per acre. The site does provide for 76 parking spaces, or approximately 1.52 spaces per unit. The R4 district is a little bit vague in the parking. It does require 1 space per unit for elderly type uses, and I use that in parentheses. It does point to elderly and something else, but again, it decreases the number of parking spaces for senior citizens because typically senior citizens don't have nearly as many vehicles when they're doing that. So they'll just have the 1, where normal multifamily, you are required to have 2 parking spaces per unit. So as we talked with the developer on this one, we did knock it down to the 1 space per unit requirement, but they are offering 1.52 spaces per unit, which is about a car and a half. So we do feel that that will be sufficient. The comprehensive plan calls for this area to be industrial. We talked about this during the rezoning as well. Comprehensive plans are more of a policy document. Sometimes the boundaries in the comprehensive or the future land use map of the comprehensive plan are not necessarily meant to be exact. The boundary between the mixed use area and the industrial areas on the south border of this site. The applicant during the rezoning process did mention that they felt that this would be a great transition from the residential use to the south to then the industrial use to the north. Staff agreed with that, the commission agreed with that, and the council agreed with that. There was a landscaping plan that was included with this site plan. It did include 14 trees and 32 shrubs. The city of Indianola does have a trail plan that does call for a trail that goes kind of down the south boundary line of this to a possible future park that would be located just to the west of here. As part of the subdivision plating process that the commission did review a few months ago, we do have an easement provided for that trail. And then the only other thing we mentioned, again, Snyder and Associates has reviewed the proposed stormwater management plan, provided comments on those, and we're working with the applicant on those. And then letters were mailed to property owners within 200 feet of the property on April 2nd of 2001. I know the applicant is in here, and I believe one of them is on the Zoom call as well. If there's any questions on the comments that we have, I know as we've worked with them, they've seemed to have revised most of that. We don't have an updated site plan yet, but I think they have addressed all of the comments that we have. Our recommendation here tonight is to approve this with the condition that all of those last few outstanding issues do get resolved before it gets presented to the city council. So if there are any questions of me, I would be happy to answer them.
I couldn't tell from the plans. The east end between the building and the street is, it's kind of a large area. What's that going to be?
There is, let me pull it up here real quick. See if I can screen share real quick. So as I talk, you can kind of see it up there on the, there we go. So you're talking this area right here between 9th Street. That's encompassing.
Yeah, right.
Okay. Yeah, I think mainly, and we can let the applicant talk on that too, but I think it is kind of reserved for green space, kind of give that buffer from the road to the units.
Okay, and then the trees are around the building, in the islands, and adjacent to the building.
Pull up the landscaping plan here for you. Right there. Got a few of them in the parking lot, kind of on the south side here. You can see on the grade limits that they put in there that there'll probably be some stormwater management through this area. The city does have a storm inlet on 9th Street in this area right here that kind of does dump out into this area. So just creating a buffer from the parking lot into that use right there. And then they do have some shown here along 9th Street as well to give those street trees.
With the trail easement there, it would be up to the city to build the trail?
Yeah, so you'll
Question
recall,
mark.
yep, you'll recall we had a development proposed south of here that ultimately was not approved. And as part of that, the applicant did propose themselves to install the trail, and not something that the city requires through our site planning process that gets built. We just prefer the easement. From our standpoint, since that last proposal that we had last year also had property on the other side of 9th Street to connect to Somerset Trail, this one would essentially be a trail that would go from 9th Street to nowhere, since there's not a park at this time. So our thought was grab the easement right now. If there ever is a park over there, then the city could install that trail as part of that process.
Is there an easement on the north side of Lincoln Ridge on the other side of 9th
No, we
Street?
never, yeah, since that process never, the subdivision plats for that one that were approved that showed the easement were never recorded since the development was denied. So we do not have those easements. The thought process would be then, if we do go through the process of further subdividing the stuff, whatever happens south of here, we would get more easement on the north side on this side. What we do on the south side to make that connection would be something that we'd have to figure out, but hopefully we can get some way, shape, or form a connection over there through either that vacant parcel south of the existing development are working something out with the property owner on this side when it did come time to look at it.
Thank you.
Any other questions or comments?
Sarah, yeah, we do have, I know representatives from the applicant here, and I don't know if they want to speak at all, but just wanted to make sure you were aware.
Thank you.
You're looking at me.
Yeah, if you, it's up to you if you want to say anything or not, go ahead.
Thank you, Charlie. I'll be brief. Madam Chair, Commission, thank you very much for hearing us tonight. We are Wood Cooper Companies. We're a developer. We're a general contractor. We're a management company, and we're long-term owners of workforce and senior housing. This will be our 5th project here in the great state of Iowa. We're thrilled to be in Indianola. This is just a fantastic town. We got to know some of the people, and everything seems to be working out pretty decently. Going through a rezone, a plat, and now for site approval. But what we'll do is we'll put in 50 apartments, 18 ones, 32 twos. There'll be a host of amenities. The big one here is we put the washers and dryers inside the apartments for the folks. They don't have to go to a community laundry space. And I was going to just tell you great about those 74 parking spaces, but it looks like I got to add some parking spaces for scooters now. That's all I really had.
And it's 55 plus, right?
Yes, sir.
And what are the criteria for residents? Again, refresh us.
Regarding how they qualify for the apartments?
Yeah,
Well, with the, we are an IFO funding source here, which is the tax credit program. And our apartments will be affordable to seniors starting around 30% of the median income, all the way up to 80 on a sliding scale. There'll be some market rate apartments as well. The rents will start around $350, $370 for a 1-bedroom, and will go as high as, and I can take a second. As high as about $775 for the 2 bedrooms. And the residents pay their rent. There is no rent subsidy whatsoever going into the property. That's usually how, that's mostly how the program works.
thank you. I remember you telling us about it before, but
From my living room in my shorts.
you didn't have pants on?
Barry, did you want to add any additional comments?
No, I'm good, ma'am. Thank you.
Yeah, no,
Okay.
I think that the other one, it does show Barry on the comp, but I think, is that Brent?
Oh,
Yes.
Yeah,
Using your
okay.
Zoom.
Oh, sorry.
Nope, it's a quirky thing with the system we have set up here. I know what it's doing, so.
My apologies, Brent.
Good afternoon, Commission. Thank you for taking the time tonight. I just wanted to comment on, Charlie mentioned that there are a number of, I'd say, code review items from the plan set, and a lot of them do pertain to the stormwater management. We have went through these in detail, and we are addressing them, and we are very confident we can accomplish or address all the comments and have no issues doing so. If there's any other questions as it regards to stormwater management or engineering, I'm just here to answer questions. I should have introduced myself, Brent Jackman, Hull and Hull Engineers. I'm the civil engineer for the project. So I just wanted to be here if there's any questions and to let you know that we are addressing the comments and everything seems to do really well.
Sarah, you're on mute.
Thank you.
You're
Any additional comments or other questions? If not, is Commission ready to make a motion?
Can I motion?
Yes, I will make a motion if that's okay. I make a motion that we approve the as recommended in the staff recommendation. And some of these are going to be easy to change. Probably like the phone number will not take a long time.
Yeah.
The little things like that. Yes, that's my motion.
I'll second.
Second, okay. Charlie, and take,
Freeburg,
Yes.
Needles,
Yes.
Ormsby,
Yes.
Ritchie,
yes.
and Ferris.
Yes,
Thank you, Sarah.
You're welcome.
All right, so next comments.
I just try to save some time here. The current development projects that we have ongoing, listed in there. Building permit report as well. We had a much better month in the month of March than we did in February, most likely thanks to the weather. And we are having a pretty good April as well too. Matter of fact, I think we just issued about 6 building permits today. So doing pretty good, catching back up, with lumber cost and everything that we're dealing with right now nationwide. Numbers are down, I think, a little bit overall, but the good thing for us, I think, is even though our permit numbers are down, the evaluation of projects is probably ahead of the pace it was at last year at this point. So. Any
Any other-
questions on? Sorry, any questions on those? We have to answer.
Any other comments? If not, we'd entertain a motion to adjourn.
I move to adjourn meeting.
I'll second.
All in favor?
all right.
Hi.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everybody. Have a good
Thanks.
night.